1 year ago, I owned 0 houses in Japan. In 2024, I bought 5 Japanese abandoned houses as rental properties. So in this video, I'm gonna show you the 5 lessons I learned from buying 5 Akiya houses in Japan in the last 12 months. Lesson number 1, the distance to the nearest station isn't that important. The old real estate adage, location, 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 is true. You wanna buy in great location. And a lot of people equate a good location with the proximity to the nearest station. Most common requests we get from our clients who are looking for Akiya rental properties is, I want the property to be within 10 to 15 minutes of walking distance from a station. But I'd say that doesn't matter that much. Let me explain. So my first 3 properties are now rented and they're all relatively close to each other in Yokohama. The first house I bought was about 15 minutes from the nearest station. The second house I bought was 22 minutes away from the nearest station. The third one I bought was about 12 minutes away from the nearest station. They were all very distressed when I bought them, so I would say the initial conditions were similar. And guess which one rented the fastest? House number 2. It was by far the farthest from a station, but it got rented much quicker than the other 2. Was there car parking space? No. But here's why. There was a bus stop just a few minutes from the property. And on that busy road, there were many convenience stores and restaurants. So I would say the distance to the nearest station isn't as important as the access to the nearest station. Also, the access to amenities is pretty important. After all, not everyone needs to take the train to get to where they need to go every day, but pretty much everyone needs to eat and do shopping almost every day. Another important factor if the property is somewhat far from the station is having a car parking space. In many urban areas in Japan, many houses do not come with car parking spaces. So if your rental property can provide that, you'll attract the prospective renter with a car. Needless to say, the distance to the nearest station doesn't matter as much if your house has a parking space. Lesson number 2, don't be afraid of non-rebuildable houses. 再建築不可物件, aka non-rebuildable homes, refer to properties where rebuilding is legally prohibited due to zoning, land use regulations, or building code restrictions. These houses can still be sold, purchased, or lived, but cannot be rebuilt if demolished or damaged beyond repair. The question is, why the heck do they exist? Non-rebuildable houses are a consequence of Japan's dense urbanization, aging population, and evolving regulations. In other words, many houses in or near big cities were built illegally as late as in the 80s or sometimes in the 90s. So what are some implications for buyers of non-rebuildable homes? Lower market value. Non-rebuildable houses are often sold at significantly reduced prices because of their limited future use. Land use only. Buyers might acquire such properties primarily for land use, aka farming or parking lots, rather than residential purposes. Well, because of these reasons, many people I talk to freak out if a property they're interested in is a non-rebuildable house. They say things like, what if something completely demolishes the house? Does that mean I can't rebuild a new house? Well, it's true. If something happens that completely demolishes your non-rebuildable house, you cannot rebuild from scratch. Well, legally. But what are the chances of that happening if a house has been standing there for 4, 5, 6 decades? Probably slim. Plus, if it gets partially demolished, you can still fix it. Renovation is totally allowed. So what are the pros of non-rebuildable houses? The biggest advantage of non-rebuildable properties is that you can purchase them a lot more cheaply, even if they're in prime locations. Because these properties have limited use due to the inability to rebuild, they tend to be traded at lower prices. So this means that in areas where regular properties would be unaffordable, non-rebuildable properties might fit within your budget. Also, as an investment property, you're more likely to buy a lot cheaper than the same house that's rebuildable, but can charge almost the same amount for rent. That means your cash flow is going to be a lot higher too. Another advantage is that most banks won't give you a loan for non-rebuildable homes. And most people in Japan use loans to buy a house. So that means you're only competing against cash buyers, which means you're dealing with much less competition. So due to these reasons, I'm a fan of non-rebuildable houses as rental properties. In fact, most of the properties I own in Japan are non-rebuildable, and they're doing just fine. So don't be afraid of non-rebuildable houses. Lesson number 3, single family houses rentals, high demand, low supply. So when you think about the rental market in Japan, you would think more people would want to live in a condo as opposed to a single family house, right? Well, check this out. A company asked 4,000 families in big cities like Tokyo, Yokohama, and Chiba if they would like to live in rental single family houses. About 77% said Yes. These families usually had 2 or more people, earned good money, and were aged between 35 and 54. This shows that the problem isn't people wanting rental houses, but that there aren't enough available. I see this as a big chance to create more livable houses to rent. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do with my Akiya investing. In the past, people follow the pattern. Rent an apartment, buy a condo, and then buy a house with a yard. But now things are different. Some people prefer renting forever, moving around or living in the countryside while working remotely. Rental houses could become a big part of these new living choices and a growing business. So there will always be healthy demand for single family houses as rentals in Japan. Lesson number 4, the tenant screening process can be rigorous. I've been investing in real estate for several years now, and I can tell you the most costly mistake you can make as a landlord is placing a bad tenant. I would take vacancy over a bad tenant any day. Sadly, I've had to evict a number of tenants. In fact, I'm going through eviction process right now, not in Japan, but in the US. And it's painful because not only am I not getting any rent from this tenant, they're also trashing my property. The eviction process will cost me thousands of dollars in lawyer fees and cleaning up the mess they made. It sucks. My property management had a screening process in place, but come to think of it, this tenant rather moved pretty quickly. They applied, got screened, and moved in a matter of a couple of weeks or so. I was happy at the time because I got a tenant fast, but it ended up costing me more to keep this tenant than not having any. As a landlord, it's natural to want to have a tenant as quickly as possible, and that's okay. But you want to make sure you're putting in the right tenant, someone who will be happy living in your property and will treat it with respect. And most importantly, someone who will pay on time every month. In Japan, the tenant screening process can be quite rigorous. A tenant screening is done by a guarantor company. So in Japan, a landlord usually requires a tenant to have a guarantor, whether it's a company or an individual. Lastly, more tenants choose to pay a company to be their guarantor, so that's where these guarantor companies come in. So a tenant pays an annual fee to a guarantor company to be their guarantor for the lease agreement. But these guarantor companies obviously won't take anyone as their clients, because if their clients stop paying rent, the guarantor company is responsible for paying up to 6 months of unpaid rent. So their screening process is quite rigorous. They will make sure a candidate has the ability to pay rent every month by screening their income, occupation, the length of employment, age, family structure, and so on. For my rental properties in Japan, I've had a number of applicants, but very few passed the screening process. But the ones that did have become my tenants and have been paying every month so far. So if you're not getting a tenant move in a minute after your renovation is done, that's okay. You actually want to make sure you're taking in the right people as your tenants. All you need is one good tenant per property. Lesson number 5, home prices are increasing. Japan has 10 million empty homes. Japan's population is rapidly decreasing. Well, you might think Japanese real estate is going down as a whole, but home prices as a whole, especially major areas of the country, are steadily increasing. Sure, these increases are nothing like what you see in the US, Canada, Australia, and other developed countries, but I spent a lot of time with real estate agents in Japan, and they all tell me the same thing. Home prices are significantly higher than a decade ago. Sure, Japanese houses depreciate and lose value with time. A structure of a house in Japan is definitely a depreciating asset. But in Japanese real estate, the value is in the land. So if you buy in a desirable area, the chances are your property will increase in value in 5, 10, 20 years. I've been buying houses in Japan for just 1 year, but I can tell you that home prices are increasing since a year ago. So is it the time to buy or not buy? You can be the judge. So what am I gonna do? Well, I will keep buying houses in Japan in 2025. Let's leave it at that. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to learn more about how to buy your first house in Japan, I put together a comprehensive guide. It's absolutely free, so be sure to download. But if you don't have the time but have money, we have a done for you service where you can get your first house in Japan within 90 days. You can apply to work with us through the links in the description. Happy holidays. See you in 2025.